Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. US President Donald Trump hails a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East after Israel and Hamas reach a deal to free hostages and implement a ceasefire in Gaza. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets Narendra Modi in Mumbai as trade, education and the war in Ukraine top the agenda on his first visit to India. And gold prices pause after climbing $4,000, but investors still bet on further gains. Now, President Donald Trump has praised a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East after Israel and Hamas have signed off on the first phase of a Gaza peace plan. A cabinet meeting earlier today. Trump also said the hostages will be released next Monday or Tuesday and confirmed he will try to go to Egypt for the signing of that deal. Take a listen.
Last night we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. Peace in the Middle East. We secured the release of all of the remaining hostages, and they should be released on Monday or Tuesday. Getting them is a complicated process. I'd rather not tell you what they have to do to get them. There are places you don't want to be, but we are getting the hostages back on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, and that'll be a day of joy. I'm going to try and make a trip over. We're going to try and get over there.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight, and correspondent Sarah Firth, who's joined us from Washington today. So right now, Shane, let's start with you first. We heard from Donald Trump. It is a momentous moment for the Middle East. We've had so much news come out today. What more do we know?
Well, I think let's start with the positive, right? I think momentous is a good word to use, and I think it does feel like it is a historic day. And Donald Trump was saying about we've got peace. So, but I kind of look at it probably because I'm glass half empty, that it's sort of we're into the non-war section. So hopefully we can continue this momentum, and a lot of the celebrations that we've seen, both in Israel and Gaza, will turn into sort of long-serving peace. But I think we sort of need to look at what are the conditions of the ceasefire and how we can move forward. So obviously the first one is that all the fighting has to cease. Israel has to partially withdraw from Gaza. But the main one is that the hostages are going to be returned, as you mentioned. It'll start, I think, like maybe 72 hours after the agreement on the ceasefire. And I think that's kind of going to be the main sort of image that will come for it, because when we see all these hostages, going home, and then even if it's, the bodies going to the families, at least there'll be sort of a closure, and, this sort of 2 years that they've had waiting will finally be over. So I think that is the positive message to look at, is that it'll be closure for the hostages' families. But also I think in Gaza, yes, it's the end of the war, and they've lost 67,000 people. But hopefully the aid will now be getting in. We've spoken a lot about this over the last couple of weeks, about the issues over the aid. So I kind of hope that that will be the end of the issue over that.
And these are the questions that so many people have been asking themselves today. And we've seen time and time again analysts speaking about this, people involved in this deal themselves asking these questions, because I think it's important to say that Egypt has urged Israel to de-escalate or ceasefire until the Gaza deal is signed, because we still saw those plumes of smoke coming from Gaza today.
Yes, there was reports that there was people had still been killed, small amounts. But I kind of think there is a lot of issues to be worked out in the sort of 20-point plan that Donald Trump has agreed with both sides. And a lot of them are sort of fairly fundamental issues. Like one of them is going to be the Palestinian prisoners that are going to be released. There's 2,000 of them, and 200 of them are serving sort of life sentences for, I'd imagine, heinous crimes. So that's going to be quite difficult for Israel to allow these people out, and I think that is one of the sort of main stumbling blocks, because there's a lot of division and hatred from both sides. So they're both going to have to sort of accommodate each other. But I think from the Hamas side, Israel is looking for them to de-arm and to give back the hostages. So it's quite a bold move that they've agreed to phase one, because they're kind of, with the hostages going, they're losing their bargaining chip. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the next couple of steps, and everyone keeps reiterating that this is phase one of many, many, many phases to come. But I think let's just look at the positive, that we are into sort of peace mode or non-war mode, depending on which version you want to look at.
And I think that's a great point to make. And when we talk about disarming, Donald Trump said that will happen in the second phase. And a senior Hamas official today has actually said no Palestinian accepts to disarm. So there we are again. We see how difficult the next phase of this agreement is going to be. But right now we have to concentrate on the fact that we've seen people in Gaza and we've also seen people in Israel. It's very rare to see them both celebrating at the same time. So it's that tiny ray of hope right now that is in both parts.
There is, and even the Israeli finance minister said that Hamas must be destroyed once the hostages are returned. So again, that shows you like the steps that need to be followed through. So when the hostages are returned, then Israel needs to sort of stand by what it's adhering to and what it's agreed to. And in the same way, when you've got these sort of 2,000 Palestinian prisoners that are going to go back, there'll be a lot of probably radicalization that will have occurred. So they need to sort of have restraint. And it reminds me a lot of like the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. A lot of these issues were exactly the same. And that sort of ceasefire and peace managed to sort of last for decades, and it was a historic and momentous as well. So I'm very, very optimistic that in 20 years' time we'll be looking back and go, do you remember when this great peace accord was signed, which it looks like it's going to be in Egypt, but I think Trump is also talking about going to Israel as well. So.
And I must just reflect on the Good Friday Agreement, because Tony Blair was involved in that. His name's actually cropped up when it comes to this Gaza 20-point peace proposal. But it also took a long time for disarmament to happen in the Good Friday Agreement. 11 years, I think. And
one of the sort of contentious issues, and I remember, it goes right up to today. And I come from a sort of a police background in terms of my family, and people who were released who had murdered various different people and stuff like that. So, but that is when you're getting into sort of the peace phase, you have to make those sort of compromises in the same way that Israel is getting back the hostages, so they have to agree to sort of pull out of Gaza. The issue that I was kind of hoping was mentioned earlier, but it seems to have sort of now been sort of killed, is the sort of statehood for Palestine. Because we talk about Gaza, but there's the whole of Palestine. And I was kind of hoping that this was part of the sort of 20-point plan, and we'd seen a lot of Western allies recognizing the state of Palestine. But I thought it was quite telling when Donald Trump said that he didn't really have an opinion on this. Which is not very Donald Trump at all. So that would say to me that is maybe something that is very much in the grey area.
But once again, that just all mixes into how difficult this will be to implement. But I know that we have Sarah Firth with us now. Sarah, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us from Washington. So we're just talking there really about the reaction to what we heard about Donald Trump saying this first phase of the deal has been agreed by Israel and Hamas. What are your thoughts on the reaction in Washington, and why this possibly just feels so different this time?
Well, it is a rare and very, very emotional pause that we've seen in the wake of this announcement of the ceasefire deal. Now, of course, you've got Israel looking to try and pass that with a vote later on today. But, here in Washington, President Trump holding that cabinet meeting, we saw the likes of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth from the Department of Defense, Vice President J.D. Vance, all of them just singing President Trump's praises. At one point, the Secretary of State, Rubio, saying, look, one day, maybe the full story of this will be told, but that this would not have been possible without the President of the United States, President Trump. There is a real sense here, guys, in DC today and across the country that President Trump is the man of the moment, having finally seemed to apply enough pressure to Israel's Netanyahu to get to this point where you've got both sides saying that they are in agreement that this first phase, it looks like, will be going ahead. The president saying that possibly we'll see the hostages released as early as Monday. There's still a lot of details to be figured out here. It's important that this optimism that we're seeing is cautious optimism because, of course, some of those sticking points that we don't have full clarity on, they remain. But look, guys, we've been covering this on Al Arabiya. We've had so many discussions and reporting of all the twists and turns of this. There is no question that this moment feels really, really different, right? We're seeing on the streets of Gaza, people coming out and expressing for the first time in a long time, really, since the war began, that optimism and the hope for tomorrow without airstrikes, without funerals. You see in Israel, the families of those hostages who've been held for more than 700 days, sort of having that real tangible hope now that in the next few days they might see their loved ones returned home to them. So we know in reporting this story so in depth that this is a moment that is vanishingly rare. The question is really going to be whether President Trump, along, of course, with all the regional players, so Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, whether they'll be able to maintain this local trust, whether they'll be able to protect and nurture this deal, which is in the first phase, and actually see some form of lasting peace, which is so needed for everyone involved here.
It's actually really interesting because earlier I spoke to former Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy about Trump's role in all of the negotiations that took place. Take a listen to what he told me.
This deal to end the war was orchestrated by President Donald Trump and American leadership. They made the impossible happen. Israel has been under immense international pressure throughout this war to pay a ransom for the hostages that would leave Hamas in power. The previous deals would get some of the hostages out and allow Hamas to use hostages as bargaining chips to survive the war. That's horrific. President Trump here put a plan on the table that said, all the hostages have to come out now, immediately, in one go, and then we will negotiate the terms to end the war that Hamas started. This would not have happened if the US had not started putting pressure on Hamas's state sponsors like Qatar and Turkey to get them to bring Hamas to the table. It's been leading the international isolation of Hamas, which has now been left without any supporters that want it to continue fighting. And there is hope in Israel that President Trump really wants to end wars. He wants to bring peace. And I think the Trump plan really gets it.
Sarah, let's go to you. So we heard Eylon Levy speak there, and he was giving Trump a lot of praise, like many world leaders and many people have been today, for getting everybody together around the table to make this work. And it's really that pressure that needs to keep on being applied, because we're talking about how difficult it's going to be. But Donald Trump will probably be instrumental to see this through.
Yes, and that pressure, Leigh-Ann, has been absolutely game-changing. I mean, we saw the Secretary of State in the cabinet meeting talking about some of those pivotal moments leading up to this point, which, you know, for many is being seen as potentially an historic moment for this potential peace deal. He spoke about the decision by Israel, by Netanyahu, to carry out those strikes on the mediators in Qatar. Now, we know here in Washington, D.C., I can tell you guys, there was real anger, real palpable anger at those actions. It was very clear that the US wasn't tapped into the lead up to those decisions to carry out that strike on Qatar. And I think since then, you then had the Secretary of State mention, we saw the meeting at the UN of world leaders, President Trump convening the leaders of Muslim majority and Arab nations. And the mood music from that was very, very positive. We saw then Turkey's President Erdogan coming to the White House. That was friendly. And then Netanyahu coming to the White House again, and very clearly President Trump, with all those moments stacking up, willing now to apply the pressure on Netanyahu. He said after he announced the first phase of the deal had been agreed by all sides, he announced that on Truth Social Wednesday evening. And after that, he gave an interview to American media where he said, look, I spoke on the phone to Bibi, he calls him Bibi, and I told him that he couldn't go to war with the world, and that now public sentiment towards Israel will change. President Trump is a man who's very tapped in to that public sentiment, and there's been no question. And it puts it in context as well, I think, guys, the seriousness and the high stakes of this moment, because yes, there is cautious celebration, but this is against the context of 2 years of devastating war. More than 67,000 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them reported to be women and children. Gaza has been devastated. The UN declared a genocide. That is the context in which this first phase has been agreed. So there is a huge amount riding on this. And I think the hope and the questions now are over whether President Trump, having been willing to apply this pressure to Netanyahu, will be able to sustain that pressure to get us through the first phase and beyond that as well.
Yeah, just the point that you made about what the Secretary of State made about sort of Israel, do you really think that it can rehabilitate its image in any sort of quick amount of time? Because we were talking earlier, and I was thinking about like nobody's has come out of this winning. I don't think like Hamas, if their aim was to sort of goad Israel into a war, we had the sort of, I think it was about 12 days with Iran. They have gotten 2,000 prisoners back, but they're being sort of like pushed out of the picture, expected to disarm. From Israel's point of view, the genocide or whatever you want to consider it, like 67,000 people that have died, and they've basically been vilified on the global stage. Like there's no winners in this whatsoever. So I think I would agree with most of what has happened today, but I wouldn't agree with that point that I think Israel's was going to have a long way to go to rehabilitate its image and reputation on the global stage, everywhere probably except the US maybe.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I do think there's a long road ahead. And it's also worth pointing out, as you said there, the repercussions of this conflict are so wide-reaching. You have aid agencies saying that rebuilding in Gaza, it will take decades, and that's the construction side of it, right? You're going to have the Palestinian people, the Israeli people dealing with the psychological impact of this conflict. If there is now peace, and it's important to point out again that this isn't peace at the moment. This is the first phase of a ceasefire deal, and we have been here before. And guys, I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the reporters, the Palestinian journalists on the ground, reporting on what's happening in the wake of this announcement. They have been just heroic reporting throughout the 2 years of this conflict. A lot of them saying the same thing, that yes, this moment feels really different. But of course, there were some colleagues reporting on the ground in Gaza about Anas al-Sharif, the journalist who took off his flak jacket when he was reporting the last ceasefire deal. And of course, that fell apart. And in the aftermath of that falling apart, Anas was killed. So, you've got a lot of the journalists just reminding the world, I think, that the world watched for 2 years. You've had on both sides the families of those hostages waiting every day, that painstaking wait while their loved ones have been held hostage. You've had in Gaza the relentless bombardment of the Palestinians and reports of starvation, the absolute devastation that has taken place on the ground, and so many people on both sides who will not see this historic moment if indeed this becomes the moment that we see real traction towards peace now.
And I think that's a good point, because this all comes down to the fact it's a very human story. If we think about it in many respects, Shane and Sarah, we saw celebrations in Hostage Square. People have been desperate to get their family members back. We saw celebrations in Gaza because people are desperate to try to get some sort of life back. And they've lost so much. And at the end of the day, I think it's really important to remember that this all comes down to the people, and it's always them who lose out when it comes to a war. There's never winners in this situation.
So when we go to phase 2, people will need to look back on those images, because there is going to be stumbling blocks along the way for the next couple of months.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Mumbai on his first visit to the country, calling for deeper trade and cultural ties. The two leaders discussed the war in Ukraine, climate cooperation, and India's bid for a UN Security Council seat. His visit follows the landmark trade deal signed in July that's projected to add billions to both of the economies. Take a listen to what Keir Starmer had to say at the meeting.
We're creating a new, modern partnership focused on the future and on winning the opportunities that it offers, and we're doing it together. And that's why we struck the UK-India Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement in July, a breakthrough moment, years in the making. Slashing tariffs, increasing access to each other's markets to drive growth and create jobs for our people, and making life better in both of our nations.
There we are. So we saw Keir Starmer, Shane, with Narendra Modi in that meeting. And I think it's really interesting because actually Keir Starmer's been successful in sealing up trade deals. We saw that with the UK and the US trade deal. We now see that with the UK and the India trade deal. But what stood out to you about this meeting today?
Well, I thought it was interesting was the sort of dynamics of it, because you generally would think, the UK, one of the great superpowers, sort of colonizers, going to sort of India to sort of, make deals. But it kind of feels like it was the other way around, like that, Keir Starmer was going there and he needs India to sort of get on board and supply the sort of the growth that the government keeps talking about, that's going to save the economy and make, Rachel Reeves balance the books a lot easier. And they did say it was like the largest sort of delegation, 100 people, which doesn't sound that really big to me, but what do I know? But they were talking like big sort of Trumpian figures of trying to get up to 56 billion in terms of trade between the two countries. But I thought there was a couple of interesting ones. For example, in the area of defence. Because previously India's defence was very much linked to Russia, so it's interesting that sort of partnership is changing. And there was I think $500 million worth of missiles that are made. I think it was maybe in Northern Ireland that are coming over and to New Delhi. And also Keir Starmer was asked about the fact that a lot of oil that India buys comes from Russia, and he was sort of advocating, is that going to change? So there was a lot of kind of sticky points as well, but I think it was just the change in the power dynamic between the two countries. And
it's really interesting because I had a conversation yesterday about this very same thing, and I found it fascinating because when I said, and I asked the journalist I was interviewing, does Keir Starmer have the ability to put pressure on Narendra Modi to stop him buying Russian oil because it's funding the war machine? She was saying no, they're balanced players anymore. Keir Starmer just doesn't have that leverage when it comes to India
and I don't
anymore.
think India is going to sort of care either. If they can stand up to Donald Trump, they can stand up to Keir Starmer quite easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, I also just wanted to ask you that this trip is significant for Starmer and interesting in the light of Modi's relationship with Donald Trump, because that's been a little bit of a difficult road to navigate of late in the second term.
It has, and I think it's interesting seeing Starmer in India there in that meeting, channeling perhaps a little bit of President Trump, certainly when it comes to using trade deals as leverage for foreign policy. So, you know, you've got this, £350 million missile deal, 700 jobs for Britain. This was important for Keir Starmer, I think, to really make the point that Britain is back in the game. But I think the real value here, you know, hundreds of millions aside, is actually the strategic value of showing this partnership with India. It's very important for many countries in the West, not least the UK, to show that they're building this alliance. It's a counter to power from China. And very clearly, Keir Starmer making that point, that this is an alliance that sort of spans everything from trade to defence to foreign policy, that Britain is, you know, going to be a key player and strengthened by that alliance. And whether or not he got across that message, I mean, he's a very different character, of course, to President Trump. But it was interesting to see the use of economic power and trade taking centre stage in the way that it has with this trip.
My big question is, we spoke about the trade deals that Keir Starmer's managed to get over the line. This India deal was actually 3 years in the making. So he got it over the line. The US one, he got over the line too. Do you think this is partly down to the fact that the UK actually had Brexit, and it's much easier to do deals with the UK rather than the whole of the EU, which is quite a clunky system?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, I was a Remainer, but you have
I
a very...
you were a Remainer.
Well, I couldn't vote anyway because I'm not British. But I'm all for like big sort of unions, so to speak. But you know, you're dead right, and I'll admit that. So. Yes, I think the UK can be a lot more flexible, but the thing is though, with the flexibility comes the diminished size, and the EU is is a huge block and it has more weight. So, but I think it's the immigration question that's going to come up again, and even all the way in India, the sort of shadow of Nigel Farage stretched all the way there, and a lot of the coverage that I saw of this, and I wasn't covering the story sort of in any massive detail because we focus on the Gulf at AGBI, but there was a lot of questions about, you know, loosening sort of visas for Indians going into the UK, and I think in a lot of the coverage that we've been seeing from a lot of the conferences for the political parties, that is not going to happen. And I imagine that was a lot of difficult talks behind the scenes between the Indian delegation and Keir Starmer's.
Starmer said ahead of the trip they weren't going to relax visa rules, and that was something he stipulated before he even left the UK. And I think Starmer is deeply unpopular in the UK, and a lot of this is down to the division when it comes to immigration, and we've seen a real surge in reform. So I think Starmer had to go there and tread a very careful line when it came to making these big trade deals.
Yeah, because he was basically saying, we want your trade, but we don't want your people, which is a very difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, absolutely. But Sarah, there's one thing that I actually quite liked in all of this. We said that he went with a huge delegation. It was 100 CEOs, entrepreneurs, university vice chancellors, and cultural leaders. And I thought it was quite fascinating that Bollywood is going to be coming back to the UK. And I think that's something quite nice, because the UK has really suffered on the cultural front.
It has, and I mean, it is a nice, light-hearted part of the trip, but it's also a moneymaker. There's no question about that. You know, the Bollywood industry is booming, and so it's another area where you saw Starmer sort of reaching out to build these cultural ties, as well as the economic and defence aspect of this. I mean, it's really funny, you guys sort of talking about the Farage shadow looming large. I mean, it certainly does sort of, even here in America, you know, the influence is being noted. And I think some of those conversations that are being had around immigration in the UK are being watched quite closely, and the influence that reform are having. You know, Starmer clearly trying again to get across this message. boost his popularity, which is needed back home right now, giving this message that, jobs will be coming to Britain as a result of this trip, as a result of some of those deals that were announced on the trip. But whether that's going to be enough to really shore up his popularity, I mean, it remains pretty unclear at this point. But he was very clearly trying to push home this narrative that, Britain, it wasn't a Britain first message, but, you do have America with their America first agenda, India arguably with its India first agenda right now. We're seeing that starting to be mimicked by governments around the world, and certainly Keir Starmer looking to do his bit to ensure that the message got across that this was Britain, as I said, sort of back in the game, if you like.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And gold prices took a breather today after breaching the $4,000 level for the first time earlier this week. But it's not cooled interest in the precious metal, as many bank on the continuing rise of bullion. Shane, this has been quite the run for gold.
It is. It's been great.
It's been great. Yes, you can tell us why. Go on.
Yeah, I bought some gold.
Yeah. Shane's very happy here. Yes, it's not a gold tooth he has. He actually owns gold, right? Okay. So what's driving your gold price right now?
I during Trump's last presidency, I bought a small amount, and I thought, because basically you want to have gold when there's times of turbulence, and Trump brings the turbulence to the party, and with the tariffs and everything coming, I thought there's definitely going to be a lot on the table. And there's so many things that have happened in terms of geopolitics. So I think even almost like that will be sort of like if you're a sort of capitalist, you're kind of looking, okay, peace in the Middle East, that might actually lead to gold dropping down, and maybe we've seen that in the last sort of couple of hours. But there's a lot of other political uncertainty that is still sort of washing around. We've got sort of numbers to come out in the US. We've got France sort of all over the place. We've got Japan. And we've got the Fed, which is going to be October 29th. So between now and October 29th, that's when it'll be interesting to see where gold goes.
And also
the interest rates.
Questions about Jerome Powell's position in the Fed.
Yeah,
that's another instability that people are looking at when they go to buy gold. It's quite fascinating at the moment. But as we did say, gold has been on a run, but it did drop slightly by 2% today. Spot gold fell. But I wonder if that's because of optimism that you mentioned on the Middle East.
There is a little bit of optimism, but I think it'll be fairly short-lived. And what is interesting to look at is it'll make all of the other precious metals. And one of the AGBI columnists, Matty Collett, who's very popular, wrote today about how silver, palladium, all of these other ones are rising up, and like silver's been up 72%, but it's still considered undervalued according to our columnist. So maybe you'll be looking at silver tomorrow morning when you're...
Commodities are doing pretty well. I think it's fair to say that.
Definitely.
And Sarah, we've also heard from America's top banker, Jamie Dimon, and he's been warning there's a higher risk of a serious fall in US stocks than is currently being reflected. So he's thinking there could possibly be a market correction. What more has he been saying?
Yes, I mean, that warning pretty stark, and basically, in summary, saying that there's been too much optimism over ideas of a soft landing, that with inflation, that with geopolitical events happening, you've got a market that's looking unstable, and that the high surge that you've seen around gold, so passing that $4,000 an ounce barometer, it's a mark of the sort of global unease here, that you've got people looking for this safe haven, if you like, for the money. And speaking about the Fed, yet there is a lot of wariness and a lot of eyes on whether or not they're going to be able to ease the rates without sparking even more instability. And guys, off air, we're going to be taking notes because Shane is the guy to be speaking to clearly when it comes to investing in gold. But, it's a nervous moment for the markets with everything that we've just been discussing going on on the geopolitical stage. I think that warning from the head of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, it's a stark warning about that higher risk of a serious fall in US stocks.
Can I say something, Shane? Dare I say it to you? Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, old school banker. if we think about it in many respects. So they look at things very differently to how the younger generation would be looking at the markets. And I'm sort of getting to the Bitcoin theme here.
Yes,
because Jamie Dimon and them, you know, we even see the head of the ECB also not so keen when it comes to cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin has been on an absolute tear. And I wonder
definitely.
if Jamie Dimon still has that sort of old school mentality when we're seeing cryptos actually doing pretty well.
I think so, but a lot of the institutional investors are getting into Bitcoin, and obviously they've definitely been into gold. And I think it all comes down to Donald Trump, because he's pushing for the Fed cuts, which will, and it looks about 95%, some of the reports I was looking at. But also, I think he's made sort of Bitcoins and cryptos in general mainstream, which is bringing in a lot of these older fashioned investors and institutional. We've done sort of columns and various different articles about this. So I think Bitcoin seems to be riding sort of the wave as well. And I think if the Fed cut does come in, then that will lead to a lot more liquidity, but also sort of general bonds and stocks, so you won't make as much from. So everyone will go back into gold, Bitcoin. So it's looking like, I've seen predictions that it'll go to 5,000 for gold, which would be amazing.
Wow, that would be, so we're not at the top.
I think short term it is going to drop because there will be an ease in it. But the October 29th is the date for the next Fed meeting to look at, and that's like a couple of weeks away, which a lot can happen. And if they do sort of make a big cut, then I would hold on to your gold. So I'm thinking personally, hold until the October 29th and see what happens.
You heard it here first. Sarah, I wish I'd always invested in Bitcoin years ago. And I remember an ex-boyfriend about 15 years ago saying to me, do you want Bitcoin for your birthday or something else? And I chose something else.
I don't think it's too late.
I should have chosen Bitcoin.
I don't think it's too late to buy it, to be honest.
I should have chosen Bitcoin.
The investment side of things, it's so difficult to get your head around. But I've been taking notes, Shane, so thank you. You've helped me and Leigh-Ann out there today.
And now I always regret not taking that one Bitcoin. Yeah, because, 15 years ago, investing in crypto, they thought they were the bankers that were...
Or even better, one of my colleagues invested in NVIDIA a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
Like,
well, there we are.
That's like
I'm
heaven.
sure he doesn't even have to come to work anymore. Anyway, now it's that time of the show where Sarah and Shane tell us their stories of the day. And Shane, we've just been speaking about gold, and your story is about an unexpected discovery of gold in Florida.
I've done a series of these sort of random discovery stories because I genuinely love them. So this is going back to 1715. So this will tell you how long gold has been important. So a ship was caught in a hurricane in July 1715. And it had what they're claiming could be up to 400 million worth of gold and silver coins. And so these are at the bottom of the sea, off Florida, by the way, Sarah, if you're going anywhere there looking for gold. And this haul was worth about $1 million. So there's still millions down there in the Florida Sea to find. So I just love these stories of people randomly finding all of these treasures hidden away. It kind of reminds me of like Johnny Depp and Pirates of the Caribbean kind of level of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, maybe we should go and do some scuba diving in Florida. Maybe we won't have to start buying gold.
In Florida.
Yeah, we can go and forage it. That's a great idea.
In Florida on the agenda.
Yeah, and we can get someone to polish it up for us. It's looking a bit green there. But we'll get our gold sorted out. And Sarah, your story is a little bit different, but it's absolutely amazing, and it links back to the first story we were discussing today. It's about two doctors who met in Gaza and them actually reuniting.
Yes, it's an incredible story. It's a story of the moment, certainly, given everything that we're seeing play out with that potential ceasefire deal now. You had Mohammed Mustafa, a doctor who's British-born. He's now an Australian citizen. He went to Gaza to help out in the hospitals there. And there he met Noor, his wife, wife-to-be. They ended up getting married in April, just before he left Gaza. She was an intern training to be a doctor, and she's spoken about, being an intern in that moment, with everything that's been happening in Gaza, the stories and the things that both of them witnessed are just absolutely devastating. And yet, despite the horror of the war around them and the chaos of all of that, they found love, they got married, they've been separated because Dr. Mo had to go back to Australia. Noor, his wife, then joined him recently. And there was this beautiful video, I don't know if you guys were able to see it, but of them being reunited at the airport. Noor was waiting for him in Australia, where she's now relocated. Dr. Mo had been trying to drum up fundraising in the US, and he arrived back. And it's just those hugs, those smiles, the love that is so evident between them. And I think it really highlights, doesn't it, at this moment, just what's at stake here, because there are, you know, throughout the course of this devastating war, these really incredible stories of hope, of resilience, of love, and really this opportunity hopefully now being extended to so many more people if the war does indeed come to an end now.
And as we said, Shane, it's the ceasefire that gives us hope. What's your thoughts?
It is good now. I feel quite capitalist now, chasing gold in Florida when there's these nice stories out there. I'll try and do better next week.
No, we like the gold story and chasing it, but it's also nice to see both sides of things. And obviously, Sarah's story just reminds us that there's such a human element to everything that's going on.
I think so,
difficult.
because you kind of, when you think like 67,000 people died and there's all of the rubble, it is easy just to get quite sort of ambivalent about it. So it's quite nice to put like those human names and stories on these tragedies.
Yes, of course. And we wish them all the best in their new life, of course. So thank you so much to our guest, Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight, and correspondent Sarah Firth, who has, of course, been joining us from Washington. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on X. G&T will be coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.